this September meeting of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. We've had apologies from Sharon Briggs from Bury, Councillor Jenny Bullen from Wigan. Item 2, just two announcements to make. Firstly, it's a warm welcome to Jim Wallace, new Chief of Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. This is Jim's first full meeting of the Combined Authority, so welcome, Jim. We know that you are already well in post with feet under the table, leading the review of Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service, and good progress is being made. A new shift system for the service came into effect at the beginning of this month, which has given firefighters much more predictable working patterns, and as a result much more stable home and family arrangements, and we think that will help lift morale. So we are absolutely moving in the right direction, and will continue to do so under Jim's leadership. So welcome, Jim. Good to see you here at the meeting this morning. The opposite is the next announcement, and it's to sadly announce the departure of one of our good friends and colleagues, John Lamont, who has announced that he will be taking up a post with the Sydney Metro. I can't for the life of me understand what attractions Sydney has that Greater Manchester doesn't, but of course we wish John well, and we note the progress, the huge progress made under his leadership in the last 6 years, I'm sorry, the extension of the Metrolink, the Lee guided busway, which was a challenging project, as we all know, but has delivered exactly what John and his team said it would do and more. A whole range of other improvements. So we've come on significantly under John's leadership, and we will miss him greatly. But of course, we send John our very best wishes as he takes up this new challenge. With us for some time yet, though, so we'll continue to get every last drop out of you, John, before you go. But congratulations from us all. Without any further ado, we'll go into the rest of the agenda. Item 3, declarations of interest, are to be completed in the normal way. Item 4, minutes of the Combined Authority meeting of the 27th of July 2018. Deputy Mayor.
Could I just point out, Mayor, that I was at that meeting, so I'd be grateful if the record could show it. Thank you.
Quite sure why you've been expunged from the record, but I remember your excellent contributions at that meeting, and we will amend the record accordingly. Otherwise, are they approved? Thank you, colleagues. Item 5, appointments. The CA will have to bear with me as we work through this list of appointments. So firstly, Waste and Recycling Committee, to approve the appointment of Councillor Susan Emmett to replace Councillor Neil Emmett as the Rochdale representative on the Waste and Recycling Committee. Is that approved? Thank you. B, to appoint one substitute Labour member from the pool of nominations received to replace Councillor Susan Howarth. The proposal is to appoint Councillor Mary Whitby from Bury. Is that agreed? Thank you. C, to approve the appointment of Councillor Councillor S. Bashforth to replace Councillor Larkin from Oldham. Agreed? Thank you. To approve the appointment of Councillor P. Davis to replace Councillor C. I'll get this wrong, haven't I? Pythian, is that right? No. Fithian. Had that one before, I think. Is that agreed, colleagues? Thank you. D, GM Culture and Social Impact Fund and AGMA Statutory Functions Committee, that is to approve the appointment of Councillor John Byrne from Bolton to replace Councillor Mohammed Zaman from Rochdale. Agreed? Thank you. E, the GM LEP to approve the appointments of Councillor Andrew Weston, Leader of Trafford, to replace Councillor Sean Fielding, Leader of Oldham. Agreed? Thank you. Growth Company to appoint one GMCA member to replace Councillor Kath Hines from Trafford, and the proposal is that we appoint Councillor Aruj Shah from Oldham. Agreed? Thank you. European Social Investment Fund Subcommittee to approve the appointment of Sean Fielding to replace Andy Burnham, GM Mayor. Definitely in favour of this one. Is that agreed? Don't oppose this one. Thank you. H, Transport for the North Scrutiny Committee to approve the appointment of Councillor Rachel Skillen from Bury to the TFN Scrutiny Committee. Is that agreed? Thank you. Finally, the Halle Board to approve the appointment of Councillor Janet Emsley from Rochdale to replace Councillor Linda Thomas from Bolton, and to approve the appointment of Eamon Boylan, the GMCA Chief Executive, to replace Donna Hall. Is that agreed? Thank you very much, colleagues. Item 6, TFGM minutes, 14th of September. Are they noted? Thank you. Item 7, GM LEP, 17th of September. Again, to note the minutes. Thank you. Item 8, GMCA Resources Committee minutes, the 27th of July. Are they noted? We are going to bring back proposals to improve the gender balance of the Resources Committee, but they will be put forward at a later CA meeting, just to note that. Item 9, GMCA Waste and Recycling Committee, to note the minutes. Thank you, colleagues. Item 10, Audit Committee minutes. A couple of points here. Firstly, to note the minutes. I'll take it they're noted. But secondly, to consider the recommendation of the Audit Committee held on the 26th of September regarding the Treasury Management Report. And we're asked to agree the following: that the Treasurer, in conjunction with the Monitoring Officer, be authorised to enter into a 165 million loan facility with the European Investment Bank, and subsequently to draw down loans in line with the longer-term funding requirements of the combined authority. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Item 11, this is to note the Overview and Scrutiny Committee minutes from the Housing, Planning, Environment Committee, Economy, Business, Growth and Skills, Corporate Issues and Reform, of their August and September meetings. Are they noted? Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to the substantive business, colleagues. Item 12, Brexit update and consideration of Greater Manchester's preparedness for the UK's exit from the European Union. Colleagues will recall at our earlier meeting we said the time had come for a more substantive debate and discussion about GM's position with regard to the uncertainty that we're facing with regard to arrangements for our exit from the European Union. So what has been done to inform the discussion is the preparation of a much more detailed report setting out the principles on which GM will seek to negotiate with the government. So what I propose to is to invite Deputy Mayor Sir Richard Lees to introduce the report, but then open the item up for a more substantive discussion. Richard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Clearly, even since this report was written, the situation has changed. What appears to be a fairly disastrous summit last week, and an even greater level of uncertainty about where we might get to by March of next year, and whether there is going to be an agreed deal that can pass the test of a meaningful vote in Parliament, or whether we are going to crash out of the European Union with no deal at all. I think this report attempts to do a number of things. First of all, it I think updates our lobbying position in terms of the whatever negotiations are taking place. I think it doesn't change any of the positions that we've have adopted fundamentally, but tries to relate them more to the current situation and the white paper that was issued by government a couple of weeks ago. I think it hopefully will help us inform the public of Greater Manchester of what is going on, but also what the risks are to Greater Manchester. Officers of the Combined Authority have been trying to do more detailed work about what those risks might be, and clearly that's been made much more difficult by the refusal of central government to release the assessment that they have done and allow us to use those to again give people in Greater Manchester a more accurate position about what the likely impacts are of different scenarios. Certainly in terms of previous information that was available to us, which talked about hard Brexit at having a minus 12% impact on projected growth in the Greater Manchester economy over a 15-year period. No deal is likely to be at least that in terms of its effect. At a national level, there's very high risk of recession. I don't want to be accused, as people often are, of scare tactics, but these are things that the Bank of England, what major industry bodies are talking about. And we know that from previous recessions that by and large the people who suffer most in recessions are those people who are already doing least well within our society. So the areas of Greater Manchester that are behind the curve economically are the areas that are most likely to suffer from no deal. And I guess there is an irony there that there are also by and large those areas that were most likely to have voted for leaving the European Union. Government has started to issue advice notes about the risks around no deal. I think the time has come to ask our own civil contingencies organisation to start planning for what we might need to do at a Greater Manchester level. Clearly, again, the report identifies that there are some very clear first day risks around basics, around food, around medicines, because and around any part of our economy that depends on just-in-time supplies, and part of those supply chain is elsewhere within the European Union. And we clearly need to be looking from a Greater Manchester point of view what we might be able to do to mitigate the risk, particularly about those first day immediate problems scenarios. I've also referred to, I think, the lobbying that we need to do, that we need to work harder to have an informed public. I think we also need to think about what the political position we should take in respect of the collapse of negotiations and a potential no-deal outcome for leaving the European Union. I'm a Remainer. I voted Remain, I campaigned Remain. I would dearly love us to stay within the European Union, but I'm also a Democrat and recognise that that was not what the British public voted for. However, I don't think the British public voted for crashing out of the European Union with no deal either. And we need to think about what our response should be to that if it is likely to happen. I agree with the leader of the Labour Party that if this government is incapable of coming to a negotiated agreement with the European Union, then they should seek a general election. We should have a general election. I would hope very much then that we would have a government that is capable of negotiating an agreement. But we also have to bear in mind that that might not be possible. And that does bring us to the issue of the people's vote. I have to say that I'm in general not in favour of referenda. The last one being perhaps a good example why I might not be in favour of a referendum. And in general, I don't think two wrongs make a right. The last referendum, the Brexit referendum, demonstrated a very fractured Britain. I think the fractures have got worse since that referendum, and I think a second referendum could really rip us apart as a country. I think the potential impact would be very, very worrying indeed. But if it becomes a choice between no deal and the referendum, then it is probably the lesser of the two risks in the impact it has. But I think we should only see another referendum. And if the referendum doesn't have a Remain option within it, then there is absolutely no point in having a referendum whatsoever. But I do think it should be seen very much as last resort, because I think we know what impact it would have. And that it's an impact that would be felt in Greater Manchester. Because whilst I might be a Remainer in Greater Manchester, we know at the time of the referendum, 7 out of the 10 districts voted to leave. I think we need to respect that as an organisation and be very wary about the impacts it will have on our own local communities. I'll finish there, Chair.
Thank you very much, Richard. A very clear, cogent and powerful presentation on the GM position. As the paper lays out, there is so much that we still do not have clarity about, and we are a matter of months away from what potentially is a cliff edge scenario. I propose to open the floor to contributions to colleagues before I will seek to sum up. But in inviting people to comment, if colleagues wish, just to draw people's attention to what Richard said, that no deal is a nightmare scenario for Greater Manchester, given that we send more of our exports to the EU, 58% in total of our exports, than the UK average, which is 44%. Hence, a no-deal scenario would hit us harder than the UK economy as a whole. The airport is still unclear what it would mean. Greater Manchester Police are still unclear what it would mean. I think the position that we would want to rally around today is to say that no deal is fundamentally unacceptable to us, and that all means necessary should be used to stop it, as Richard just said, including as a last resort the call for a second vote. But I think that strong message around a no-deal scenario being fundamentally unacceptable to Greater Manchester is obviously, hopefully, something we can rally around today. Could I open the floor? Any questions or comments? Councillor Linda Thomas.
Could I just draw everyone's attention to the fact that we're not quite sure over the EU national status, and the problem with that is one particular area, and that is care workers in this country. You know, the government is still promising us a green paper, which we've not had. Local government has sent in all their feelings and fears and ideas about it to the government now. But if we crash out of the EU, I'm very fearful that this industry, well, if you want to call it an industry, it's a public sector industry, will collapse.
Just to flag up from the paper, 2,622 people of the current GM workforce in health and care are EU nationals. That's 3.8% of the total, and I would guess that there's a higher concentration in social care possibly as well of those numbers. Any other colleague wanting to come in? Councillor Andrew Weston.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I mean, I'd firstly begin by echoing the comments about the absolute unacceptability of a no deal in terms of our leaving the European Union. What I would add to that, I think, is that the government have messed us around on this. It's my understanding that they have undertaken an impact study on the impact on Greater Manchester of Brexit and are refusing to make that information available. That is totally unacceptable. They are doing a bad enough job in negotiating our exit from the European Union without withholding information from those of us that are going to have to deal with the catastrophic impacts of Brexit. I think the point about care workers that Councillor Thomas made is absolutely right, and it's a particular issue for us in Trafford because of the relatively low pay of care workers against the, again, relatively high cost of living that we have in Trafford. It means that we have a real issue in attracting people into the care profession, and we certainly cannot underestimate the impact that losing a substantial number of those from the care workforce, the impact that that would have. I just wanted to mention briefly the issue of the second referendum. I appreciate that many of us in this room would prefer a general election, and I think that's something that in fact I would like to see. But Trafford itself is a strongly Remain borough. We voted 58% to Remain. And I have to say that at a council meeting on Wednesday, we did pass a People's Vote motion. I think it's absolutely right that, having given people a say on whether or not to leave the European Union, we retain the option of asking people to agree the terms of the deal. So I welcome us saying, even as a last resort, that that is something that we would be prepared to call for. I don't think we can underestimate the impact here with the 12% possible contraction of our local economy. It's absolutely imperative that we keep as many options as possible on the table, but most of all that we continue to put pressure on government to avoid that no-deal Brexit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Bev Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to start by saying I agree completely with Councillor Leese's analysis here of you know, the position we should take. I share that. My one caveat is that this report makes it very clear, really, both the immediate and the short to medium term impacts of crashing out of the EU without a deal. And whilst we all rehearse that phrase reflecting the democratic decision of the British people in relation to leaving the EU, I don't think any of the people of Greater Manchester probably voted for the consequences that are spelled out here, which make very grim reading indeed of the impact on our communities of crashing out without a deal. Having said that, I just wanted to add a bit of more information, because the report rightly focuses largely on the economic impact for our people. It makes reference, passing reference in paragraph 4.8 to some of the implications for our policing, our security, our intelligence, our counter-terrorism activity. The Association of Police and Crime Commissioners and the National Police Chiefs Council are pressing government continually, because crashing out without a deal really makes it very unclear and puts in jeopardy the extensive cooperation with EU partners on international and organised crime, on counter-terrorism, security, information, intelligence sharing, access to international databases, the mutual recognition we have of many of our judicial processes, enabling us to bring criminal to justice. And this really is in jeopardy, and it's actually, I think, quite terrifying, the prospect of not having agreements on how those arrangements can continue if we don't have a deal in terms of Brexit. It's very serious.
Thank you very much indeed, Bev. Any other colleagues want to come in before I summarise? Brenda. Councillor Brenda Warrington.
Thank you, Andy. I think I certainly agree with all of the contributions that have been made so far, and it would be a major disaster for Greater Manchester if the government, as incompetent as they are these days, end up with bringing us a no-deal scenario. And one of the areas that we haven't actually mentioned is Manchester Airport. And Manchester Airport, of course, is a major employer, brings a lot of business into our local economy from a host of different things. I wonder what would the impact be from the situation of a no deal. You know, how would our trading with Europe, be impacted? How would we still be able to fly in and out of Europe, for example? Just where would we be up to with all of the business that flows to and from the airport, not to mention the thousands of jobs that people across Greater Manchester currently are employed to do. So I think this is a question that needs an answer, particularly in the event of a no-deal scenario. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Thank you, colleagues, for your contributions. If only there was as much clarity and consistency in Parliament over these questions, I think we would all be in a better place. Just to go through some of the issues that have been raised, Councillor Weston is absolutely right to raise the unacceptable nature of position whereby an impact assessment on Greater Manchester is sitting on a computer in Whitehall that isn't being made available to the councils represented in this chamber today, and indeed to the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. Given that analysis affects our communities, the people that we represent, on what basis are we not able to have access to that information so that we can begin to prepare a response and to mitigate from some of the more damaging impacts? It is a fundamentally unacceptable state of affairs, and I think there is a united call coming from this Combined Authority today that must end and that analysis must be shared so that we can begin to make any necessary preparations. The item raised by Councillor Thomas related to EU nationals, particularly in the health and social care system. This was raised very strongly with me at the mayoral question time here in Oldham by a member of the audience who was still feeling a considerable degree of uncertainty as to her future and indeed, by extension, her children and her family's future. There have been broad assurances, I think it's fair to say, from the Prime Minister, but still no detail of the terms on which EU nationals will be able to remain post-March and what their status will be. And I think that cannot continue. These are people who've committed their life to working to improve services in Greater Manchester, and they deserve much, much better than that. And that's a call that I think we need to reiterate today, that they are given clarity immediately so that they can plan. Otherwise, we stand to lose many valuable people who are working in our public services, in our universities, and that is simply unacceptable. The issue raised by Councillor Warrington with regard to the airport, I believe it is still the case that the airport don't know what would happen in the event of no deal. And given that is a possibility, and we are just months away, that again cannot continue to be the case much longer. Colleagues will see under item 5, there are a number of actions which it's inviting GM to consider, one of which being an assessment of the potential impacts at the airport. I would put it to colleagues today that we don't just consider, we agree to take those actions today to begin serious contingency planning, both at district level, GMCA level, and also working with partners such as the airport to get much more clarity on potential impacts. And picking up the Deputy Mayor's point, I would include Greater Manchester Police in that. If they are still unclear as to what arrangements are in place for the sharing of intelligence and police and security cooperation, then that too could be a potential breach in our security arrangements if that is not clarified soon. So I would encourage colleagues to not just consider but accept the items as laid out in 5.4. All the other principles are set out in the paper. I guess the theme that unites them is a call for more devolution as the answer to Brexit. That's certainly the argument that I advanced in a speech that I made in London a couple of weeks ago. I think many people in Greater Manchester, including in this borough, voted Leave, well, for a range of reasons, but one significant reason was a feeling of powerlessness in the face of change brought about by globalisation, and a sense that our political system, Westminster and Brussels, had not kept pace with how things were changing in towns like Oldham, and actually that system wasn't focused enough or didn't care enough about places like this. The best answer to it that I can see is more devolution. Put more power here so we can give more power to Oldham and other communities like it, to do more for ourselves, to help ourselves prepare for the world as it is. And that's certainly the principles that underpin our proposals for the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the potential successor funding for EU structural funds. Give us full flexibility and freedom over that funding so that we can deploy it in the way that we need to help our communities face the uncertainty that we're seeing. So that, I think, colleagues, is a summary. But I think I'm hearing a very strong endorsement for Sir Richard's call for a no-deal Brexit to be opposed outright, and also that if there are no other options left, that this CA would support a people's vote if we were at the very edge of that cliff edge with no other options left. Perhaps having asked for time to be given to extend Article 50, everything else exhausted, that I think is what we're saying. Is that a fair summary, colleagues, of the discussion that we've just had? And are we agreed on those positions? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Sir Richard. Item 13, homelessness and rough sleeping update. This is a very substantial paper. Apologies for the late arrival, colleagues, but it brings up to date a number of the themes that colleagues will be familiar with. And it shows how the threads that we've been developing come together now to make a substantial and hopefully effective response to the growing problem of rough sleeping and homelessness across Greater Manchester. I'll invite Portfolio Lead Mayor Paul Dennett to say a little more in a moment, but just to pick out a couple of the key points. Colleagues will note that one of the recommendations is to acknowledge the extension of the Greater Manchester Social Impact Bond for entrenched rough sleepers, and there are figures in the paper which show the level of provision that's been offered in all 10 boroughs under the SIB. It also shows that 112 people have been accommodated under the SIB so far, with a very small dropout rate, which is a great tribute to those who've designed the scheme and those running it. It is successful, but colleagues may also see quite a big gap between the number of people who've been referred to the SIB and the actual number of people accommodated. 526 referrals, 112 accommodated, a further 32 under offer. The money received from the government, £829,000, which came in the summer as part of the National Rough Sleeping Strategy, will enable us now to offer provision to those referred but not yet accommodated, which is excellent news. And on this case, we do have to show our appreciation to the government for providing that extra funding. There are proposals here to finalise the procurement of our Housing First scheme, which is £8 million over 3 years. We're being asked to delegate authority to the Treasurer in consultation with myself and the Portfolio Lead to take that towards a successful tender and contract award. And again, that could be a significant improvement on our offer. Maybe invite Mayor Dennett to add anything to that, and then I will conclude with some words about the proposals for this winter and the A Bed Every Night campaign. Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Burnham. Yeah, I mean, this is a bi-monthly update that we bring to the Combined Authority to update colleagues on progress today. And as Mayor Burnham's already highlighted, we are making great progress here in Greater Manchester. But that's really testimony to the collaboration, I think, that takes place within the city region across the 10 local authorities, as well as the fact that we've got a mayor in Andy Burnham who's prioritised tackling homelessness and rough sleeping. You will all be aware that we have pledged to end the need for rough sleeping by 2020, which is radically different to where the government are at in terms of their own rough sleeping strategy nationally, which is about ending it by 2027. We've also done an awful lot of work around trying to move towards our 10-year strategy for tackling homelessness within Greater Manchester, which has been very much a partnership of local authorities, the private sector, the community and voluntary sector, and also people who have actually been rough sleepers and also homeless. So that co-production really sits at the heart of what we're trying to achieve here. And government have obviously recognised that we are making significant progress in tackling rough sleeping and homelessness in Greater Manchester, which is why they've awarded us the further £829,000 to support the work that's taking place across Greater Manchester around the social impact bond. We know that that was significantly oversubscribed. You know, we had over 500 referrals. We had to pause the scheme because of the amount of referrals coming into the system. And I think for me, what that points to is that homelessness and rough sleeping is much more of a broader systemic issue. In a sense, it's a symptom of a failing system, and I think we need to be cognizant of that. One of the main causes of homelessness and rough sleeping within Greater Manchester is Section 21 orders within the private rented sector, so no fault evictions basically. And I think we need to really seriously look at what's happening within the housing market across Greater Manchester, both in terms of the under-provision of social housing and council housing, but also in terms of no-fault evictions within the private rented sector, because clearly that is creating significant impacts on local authorities in statutorily dealing with homelessness across the city region. In addition to that, we know that welfare reform is having a huge impact on people's lives, and I know there's a report later on the agenda looking at universal credit and how that is disproportionately exacerbating the issue of homelessness and rough sleeping. And then on top of that, we're all aware, certainly as local authority leaders, that cuts to our own local authority budgets is certainly not helping in terms of building the capacity within the system and the provision within the system to support people who find themselves in these circumstances of destitution and real vulnerability. But like I say, I mean, in a sense, what this articulates is a bi-monthly update of where we're up to. But I just want to draw attention, really, that this is, you know, it's a systemic problem. And unless we solve the system, we're always going to be treating, if you like, the symptoms of a failing system, which is rough sleeping and homelessness. And there's more that needs to be done, but I think we're well ahead of a lot of other parts of the country at the moment in terms of the approach that Greater Manchester has taken to tackling homelessness and rough sleeping. And that is a credit really to all of you in this room and many people outside of this room in the private sector, the community and voluntary sector, and even faith-based organisations as well. So thank you, and this is just an update for everyone's attention. Thanks.
Thanks very much indeed, Paul. Paul mentioned the efforts we've made with partners through the Greater Manchester Homelessness Action Network to develop a comprehensive strategy. And just to remind colleagues, it was based on the principle of 4 R's. Reduction, step 1, that's preventing homelessness in the first place. Secondly, where it occurs, respite, so the second R, respite. Thirdly, recovery, helping people deal with the issues, often mental health related or addiction related. And then fourthly, reconnection to opportunities in wider society. This paper deals with those 2 middle R's, effectively, those 2 middle steps, respite and then recovery. On the question of respite, last winter we enhanced our offer above the statutory minimum, which colleagues will know is to offer emergency accommodation where the temperature falls below 0 3 nights consecutively. We decided as Greater Manchester, absolutely rightly at the time, first to do it, that we would do it on any night where the temperature dropped below 0. However, we have had to take time to learn what happened on the back of last year, and the feedback that came was it was confusing for both the organisations providing that respite accommodation and indeed councils, as well as the people benefiting from it, in that people were in some nights, then they were out, and it was all quite difficult to manage. It was also put to us that when the cold weather landed in a prolonged spell, the beast from the east, actually the prolonged period when people were in the same accommodation presented an opportunity to work with people and to signpost them to the opportunities that were there. And it was that stable provision, that stable respite provision, that made all the difference in helping people come back together, focus on themselves again rather than worrying about whether there would be the next night, and then begin to deal with some of the issues that were preventing them from moving away from the street. So the campaign that we're putting to you today, A Bed Every Night, is to take that ambition further and to see if we can, this coming winter, provide that level of respite provision. I think our principle in Greater Manchester should be that we pick people up the moment they fall, and that's what A Bed Every Night seeks to do. If you are out just one night on the streets, there is significant damage, not just to your physical health, but your mental health as well. And with every further night out that you spend, that damage accumulates. So A Bed Every Night is actually a groundbreaking move, but would create the right platform at stage 2 under respite to then see the success of our further aims. Item 3 then, of course, is recovery, and that's the SIB and the Housing First proposal that Paul has just outlined. We believe those schemes will have more chance of success if people are coming from a stable provision in respite provision, so that then they will be able to make a success of the offer under the SIB or indeed under Housing First. The fourth element of our plan is reconnection, and as Paul says, we are absolutely overwhelmed by the support given by Tim Heatley of Capital and Centric, who is chairing our business network, who are bringing businesses together to provide financial support to us and other types of support, but crucially to begin to make job offers to people coming through this journey away from the streets. And that is true reconnection. And already there are people that Tim has successfully placed who were on the street just a matter of months ago that are now in employment in Greater Manchester. So I think colleagues can see how this journey is really taking shape. I think the R where we're kind of less successful, I think, is reduction, to be honest, recognising that there are significant numbers of people in Greater Manchester just one step away from the street in temporary accommodation, or indeed in private rent, very poor private rented accommodation. And I think we need to have a much greater focus on that whole question of temporary accommodation. The Manchester Evening News has done some very good work shining a spotlight on this particular issue. But I think as we deal with some of the more immediate problems in front of us, the problem on the street, I think we need to turn our focus to that whole question. Sir Richard Lees, to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. A number of comments I want to make. Clearly, a large element of this paper is around rough sleepers, and particularly entrenched rough sleepers. There are other aspects to it as well, but we know from direct experience that there is quite often a confusion in the public's eye between rough sleepers and everybody who's sat on the street in a sleeping bag and with a cup in front of them. It is the case that some rough sleepers are begging. It's also the case that a very significant number of beggars are not rough sleepers. And again, if you walk around Manchester city centre at 12 o'clock midday or 8 o'clock in the evening, you'll find the population has changed because a lot of the beggars have gone home. There's something we said over and over again, that if we really want to help people, don't give to beggars on the street. Give to the Mayor's Fund, give to the Big Change Fund, give to organisations that are going to help get people off the street. Giving to people on the street just helps keep them there. The second thing, as I said, this does deal very much with rough sleepers, that there have been a number of initiatives beside these taken at a local level. In Manchester, for example, we've got Longford Court. There are other initiatives in the pipeline that ought to be able to increase the supply of temporary immediate accommodation for people who are made homeless. And it's really important to us as a city in that the Manchester Labour has a manifesto commitment that nobody in Manchester should have to sleep rough within the city, that we all should be able to provide a home, a roof for everybody. I'm not naive about this. I know the nature of rough sleeping, and that the mental health problems that a lot of rough sleepers will have, the drug and alcohol issues that many of them face, that even when we had no shortage of homes whatsoever, we couldn't get everybody off the street. So the likelihood is still we won't be able to get everybody off the street, but there should still be a choice available to people of a roof over their head. I think we're probably very close to being able to identify the physical accommodation to do that. However, what we've not been able to do yet is identify all the support required to do that. And there is a particular issue around mental health support and the need to be able to provide effective mental health support. And I think, again, I think we need to make that a priority, working through the health and care deal and with colleagues in the mental health trust to make sure that this is a priority within those organisations and that we do get the support provided. I think the last thing I really want to talk about, though, is that in dealing with rough sleepers, whilst we're dealing with the very visible signs of homelessness and the housing crisis, then in some respects this is only quite a small part of the housing crisis. The Manchester City Council Executive, a couple of weeks ago, we had a report on the draft updated homelessness strategy for the City of Manchester that's going to the Homelessness Partnership at the end of the month for ratification. I'll just take one element of that, which I think really shows the frightening scale of what we are facing. There are now over 1,700 families in Manchester in temporary accommodation. We are no longer able to house all of those families within the City of Manchester. We've had to use temporary accommodation outside the borough. The biggest source of those homeless families, and something that Paul Dennett referred to, are evictions from the very bottom of the private rented sector market. And again, it's in terms of the temporary accommodation, that's where we're finding, that's where we're putting them back as well. There is something that's really quite twisted about that. But 1,700 families where the prospects of finding permanent accommodation quickly are very slim indeed. That means thousands of children living for quite a long period of their lives without a stable home. And that's clearly got to be completely, totally unacceptable. We could look at empty houses. If we look at long-term empty residential properties in the City of Manchester, the current rate is round about 0.5. That's 1,400 homes. Even if all of those homes were suitable and could be brought back into use, it's not enough to house those homeless families. If we were to provide social housing or social equivalent for all of those families, the subsidy bill for that in order for those families will be around about £160 million. And even that isn't the entirety of the homelessness crisis we face. This is many, many years of not building a sufficient range of housing and simply not building enough housing. And clearly this has got to be a big factor when we do look at the GMSF. But we're not going to be able to build houses quick enough to be able to deal with and provide adequately for all of those families if we are dependent on building new stock. So I think I welcome what's within the report. I welcome the actions we are taking. I think we need to recognise that we are as very much the victim of what is a national housing crisis, where nowhere near enough is being done nationally to address that. The ultimate solutions to that are going to be long-term, because we will not be able to build fast enough, and we are going to have to look very, very hard to find innovative solutions to how, in the short term, those families with children, can make sure that those children are able to grow up in a secure, stable environment.
Thanks very much indeed, Richard, for those important points. If any other colleagues want to come in, if not, I'll just seek to summarise references made by both Paul and Richard to the... before I summarise, Brenda, do you want to come in?
Just briefly, if I may, Andy. Again, like Sir Richard, I do welcome this report and do recognise the amount of work that is being done. But of course, I think we're all very aware that we are really only touching the tip of the iceberg at the moment, and that this problem is continuing to grow. I think one of the things that I certainly recognise is that the Manchester city centre area, which has the largest number of rough sleepers, from what we can gather, is in a difficult situation, because I think we have a situation where people that are rough sleeping will move around. They don't stay necessarily in the same place, and many of them do gravitate to the city centre in the belief that there are facilities there that may not exist elsewhere, although I'm sure that they do. In Tameside, we have a team that regularly still goes out, certainly on a weekly basis, if not more, when, and particularly when we had the Beast from the East situation, they were going out every single day, every single evening, you know, to sort of contact and try to help people. Now it's not quite as frequent, but it's still being done. And we're not finding the same people necessarily. As you said, you know, it's different people constantly, and we have to address that. But I think Sir Richard's point that not all homeless people are rough sleepers, and we do have to address the need for housing, you know, that in itself brings us. I just want to make a plea, quite honestly, that the Housing First allocation is something that is welcomed and is essential, but there has to be a fair distribution of that across all of the districts in Greater Manchester, and not just focused in one particular area. I know that we would want to play our part, and I do hope that we can be allowed to do that. So, as I say, welcome the report, welcome the work that's being done, knowing that we all need to do more. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brenda. No, that's a very fair point, and I give colleagues a commitment. I'm sure I speak on behalf of Paul as well. When the detail has been worked out for Housing First and the preferred tender identified, that we will bring further information back to colleagues to say exactly how it will be done to ensure that it is fair to all 10 boroughs and follows need. It is, though, right for me to say that in city centre Manchester, as I have seen when I do my early morning walkabout, it is very often people from all 10 boroughs who've gravitated into the city centre. So obviously, and parts of Salford too, to be fair, that need the greatest resource to deal with that problem, which emanates from all 10 of our boroughs. Reference was made to the impact of welfare reform and the growing challenge from the rollout of universal credit, and we're about to hear an important presentation from Councillor Sean Fielding on this very subject, which also needs to be addressed, as well as the issues that Sir Richard raised around temporary accommodation and the situation there, because that is the challenge. That's where the problem is coming from. The shortage of affordable housing combined with the benefits rules as they are, and that continues to make our challenge even greater. However, that said, today is a major moment in the escalation of our response to what I have described as a humanitarian crisis, because that is exactly what it is. Manchester did make the commitment at the local elections to provide a bed every night, and what this is saying is that let's take that GM-wide. To pick up some of the concerns people have, and particularly the point Brenda just made, I think this is important that, you know, when we've delivered this commitment, we do have a clear message to the public that it's right to donate to the Mayor's Fund and the Bed Every Night campaign, or to Big Change, set up to provide direct individual support to rough sleepers, so that that gets the money where it needs to go. And I think until we've got provision in place for people, it's hard to give that message to the public when there isn't enough provision. You know, they will rightly say, well, I'm going to give on the street if there's nowhere else for people to go. once we can say confidently that that provision is in place, then I think we can have a stronger, clearer message to the public about how best they can support our efforts. The second point to mention is, I think a bed every night has to apply to people whose last address was in Greater Manchester, because I don't think we would wish to see a situation where there's an incentive for people to travel here from even further afield. You know, this campaign has to be for people living here, made homeless. And the call I would make today is to ask other city regions to follow this lead and to put in place a similar campaign, so that there isn't the situation where people will have an incentive to move from one city to another. If we do this together, then we can tackle it together. A bed every night isn't fully funded yet, but you will have seen in the news an amazing move this week by the captain of Manchester City Football Club, the wonderful Vincent Kompany, to dedicate his testimonial year to this purpose. And I'm sure I'm speaking for even the red half that are well represented in this chamber today in giving, you know, our heartfelt thanks to Vincent, a legend on the pitch, but I think forever a legend for everybody for this move, because it will really bring this campaign to a much wider audience, and it really shows how all of Greater Manchester now is getting behind this drive, given that this is a place where people don't walk on by on the other side. They've been telling us all, haven't they, that they want something done, and now it is being done. And I think we can feel real pride today. This is a response to this issue that is way beyond what anyone anywhere else in this country is doing. It is thought through. It is completely inclusive in terms of the number of businesses and organisations that are playing their part. I want to thank all of you for your support in helping us bring this strategy together. I know that individual councils have already taken great strides. I think this is the power of devolution. When we can knit what's going on at the GM level with what's going on in our boroughs, we can get the whole place, civic society, business, everybody behind the same goal. And I think there's a realistic possibility now that we can bring an end to the need for rough sleeping on our streets in the not too distant future. So we are still on a journey. We are definitely not there yet, but today I think we're going up a significant level in our response, and I just want to thank you all for that, but I'm sure on your behalf thank Vincent Kompany, whose Tackle for Manchester campaign is also going to direct funds to the Mayor's Fund and the Bed Every Night campaign. And I think to conclude this item, we have a video that has been prepared. Roll the video.
I've come to the city centre to speak to people who've been here overnight sleeping rough. Today's a proud day for me because we're making the first awards from the Mayor's Homelessness Fund.
And it will enable our volunteers to see through their commitment to ending rough sleeping.
That's right. Do you want me to say that?
Mr. Andy Burnham was came to see us today, and he came out on the street with us to witness what we do for the homeless community in Manchester. And primarily we give people haircuts.
People's lives are being damaged, sometimes destroyed, by not having a home to go to. And I want to pledge myself to do what I can to be part of the answer to the problem.
A real drive that we're going to launch here. We're going to show that Greater Manchester does things in a better way than the rest, and with your help we can end rough sleeping by 2020.
Thank you very much indeed to the comms team for all of your work on the campaign. The campaign goes live, I think, today. And we'd encourage you all to promote it in any way that you can. But an excellent job. Thank you very much. But now to move on to something that will continue to give us a big challenge when it comes to dealing with this properly, and that is welfare reform, and particularly the rollout of universal credit in Manchester. A presentation before us today on the effects so far, and I'll hand over to Councillor Sean Fielding to introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. So, colleagues will know that within Priority 3 of the Greater Manchester Strategy, which is for good jobs with opportunities to progress and develop, there is an action to create an integrated GM approach to welfare reform that delivers progression and addresses low pay. And of course, in order to do that, we need to know where we're up to on welfare reform. And so this report before us this morning is the first in a series of reports about the impact of welfare reform across Greater Manchester, and in particular universal credit, which some leaders around the Chamber will be more familiar with than others, because some were pilot areas before others and some have gone full service before others. And all of those who are local councillors here as well will know through our casework some of the hardship that this is causing, particularly to some of our most vulnerable residents and some of those who unfortunately live in the most chaotic households. So contained within the report at Appendix 1, there is an overview of the reforms that have been rolled out so far within the welfare reform agenda, and a timeline that has taken place on the welfare reform agenda here in Greater Manchester. It's quite stark how much has actually changed, and the impact that each of those changes directly or indirectly has had on the household income and the circumstances of a lot of the people around the conurbation. Appendix 2 is the dashboard, which brings together the information on things like the number of people who have been sanctioned, the effects of replacing DLA with PIP, and the benefits cap and its impact on local levels of food poverty. But the thing that really brings this to life is Appendix 3, and the case studies that have been submitted by support providers across Greater Manchester and local authorities that really tell the story of how this is affecting individuals and the impact that it's having on their lives, and the pressure that it then goes on to place on acute public services too. And I am pleased to see that, as well as telling us the difficult circumstances that people have found them in, the work that has been going on across Greater Manchester to mitigate some of the worst excesses of welfare reform by our partners and by public sector organisations is highlighted there for all to see, and it's very encouraging. But those stories, those personal stories of individuals are quite distressing to read. And I was reading the papers yesterday evening in preparation for this meeting today, just to refresh my memory before making this presentation. And the stories there are incredibly distressing and incredibly upsetting. And I would encourage those who perhaps haven't got that far into the report yet to really read those, because it does bring it to life and tell you the impact that it is having on individuals, real life individuals. These are all real people. And finally, because what we need to do to develop an integrated approach in Greater Manchester is have a set of actions. And so under Appendix 4, there are 15 proposed actions which hopefully will build that integrated approach to welfare reform, provide a better service to residents across Greater Manchester. And while we acknowledge that universal credit has its failings, it is not serving the people of Greater Manchester very well. It is a system that we have. And the best that we can do here is to try and mitigate the impact of that for our residents. And some of the most significant things that we're calling on Greater Manchester to do here as part of that action plan is to bring together local discretionary schemes, so that there is a consistent approach right across the conurbation, so that people don't get different services in different areas. And secondly, to seek control over the local housing allowance as well, which is a power that the Scottish Government has already achieved and has made a difference in helping vulnerable people with rent payments, and it's something that we should seek here too. But there's a lot of information on where we are with welfare reform, the impact it's having on people, but there is also a series of actions that we can take to try and mitigate that impact and improve the quality of life for some of our most vulnerable residents that are really being affected by this. Thank you very much, Chair.
Well, thank you to you, Sean, because it's an excellent presentation. It's very, very clear, but obviously quite difficult as well in terms of the impacts it's having on residents in Greater Manchester. Two of our boroughs, Wigan and Oldham, were pilot areas, and that has helped us get this clearer picture. You would hope that the point of being a pilot would mean that the government would listen to the findings that you feed back, but that I don't think has probably been the case so far. And I would want to refer colleagues to the to paragraph 3.9 on page 10, which shows that 40% of people at the time of their second interview were falling behind or experiencing real financial difficulties. 50% required to obtain additional funds. A third of those receiving costs towards housing were in arrears in both surveys. This goes back to our previous discussion on homelessness. These are big percentages, and it's very, very worrying indeed. You mentioned the case studies. There's the whole question of universal credit going to one recipient within the household, and that potentially giving rise to further problems with regard to domestic violence, abusive relationships, and that's brought out very clearly. I don't know if any colleagues want to come in on this. What I propose is that, you know, if people have any thoughts, any comments on it, that they be fed into Sean over the next week, because there may well be reflections that come from individual elected members within the authorities having dealt with universal credit. What we've got under Appendix 4 is an excellent list of actions that we would seek, requests on the government to make it fairer, and actually to give us much more freedom and flexibility, more devolved control of the situation that, as Sean has outlined, particularly in relation to local housing allowance. I will propose that we take this back to the Reform Board next week. We'll work with Donna on this. We will take on board comments and update this paper, bring it back to the Reform Board next week, seek to approve it there, and then make those calls on the government. Just to say lastly, I think this should be part of building a case for much more substantial devolution of the DWP budget as part of our ask under the comprehensive spending review. I think through our work on place-based integration across Greater Manchester, while we find that the DWP are a willing partner, often national rules and processes stop them becoming full members of our place-based arrangements. I think we should begin to be thinking about preparing a major bid to government for DWP devolution, perhaps drawing on the basis of the health and care partnership that we have, seeking a similar arrangement with the Department for Work and Pensions, and that this work could serve as a forerunner to that. Any colleagues want to add anything to that? If not, let's take it that that is agreed, but thanks again to Sean for an excellent presentation, and indeed to GMCA colleagues and others who've helped prepare it. Stark findings, difficult findings, but certainly findings that can't be ignored, and we will seek to make sure that they're not. Thank you very much indeed, Sean. Item 14, I believe, is Sean too. It's, oh, sorry, 15, GM Skills Capital. John.
Thanks, Chair. Yep, me again. So we have received funding bids for Skills Capital funding to create some centres of excellence and feed into the demand for specialist skills centres across Greater Manchester. There are 4 bids in here seeking money from the CA, and it is recommended that we support those bids at this point. There is further work required, and what we are being asked for is the principle of agreeing to funding up to what has been requested, with further work to be done following agreement of this report today.
Thanks very much indeed, Sean. So this is about the projects identified moving to the next stage. It's not final approval. I think it's work in progress effectively, but you know, these are bids that have come to us before but are now progressing well. Any colleague want to comment on this item? If not, thank you very much, and that's agreed, Sean, so thank you for that. Item 16, Town Centre Challenge update. Colleagues will know that just over a year ago I asked boroughs to nominate a town that might receive focused support from the GMCA to particularly see if we could stimulate regeneration and residential development. We have now 9 active nominations. Pleased to say that we will have a meeting in Royton later today, the leader of Oldham and myself and colleagues, to take forward the master planning work that Oldham Council have been doing on Royton. So we have 9 towns in the scheme, and all of them are making some progress, some more than others. I think the town to have made most progress is Stockport, which I think is in part due to the head of paid service for the GMCA in his former role as Chief Executive of Stockport Council, but very much taken forward by the current Chief Executive and indeed the Director of Place, who is here today. And what we have here before us is a proposal that will help Stockport take their thinking to the next stage, and particularly take their thinking towards the part of the town that you might consider to be hardest to regenerate, which is the area we would all know as the area west of the Arches in Stockport Town Centre. Obviously, the Arches splitting Stockport Town Centre in the way that it does. This is a proposal for a mayoral development corporation, which would be the first in Greater Manchester. It has not come top down from me. It has very much come bottom up from the council. A substantial piece of work was done to identify a vehicle that would best help Stockport achieve its objectives with relation to the town centre west of the Arches, and the Development Corporation was identified as the best proposal. The paper sets out the detail. It's not for final agreement today. It's simply to ask your approval that this moves to a final stage of working out of the detail. On that basis, we're seeking your support. But I'd just like to invite Alex or Caroline to come in and add to what I've said.
Thank you. Well, we do see this as very important for this area of the town centre. It's an area of the town centre which we have tried our best to regenerate over many years. Members will be aware from previous Combined Authority meetings of progress that we are making in regeneration of the town centre and developments that are going ahead. But you will note that Town Centre West is absent from those developments because of the very trying nature of that part of the town centre, including the way in which we've been able to engage with landowners or not, as the case may be over the past few years, the very disparate and ownership of land in that area. So we're very committed to doing something about Town Centre West, and we have considered a range of delivery options for that part of the town centre to give us increased stability. That's set out in the paper, but we have within Stockport reached the conclusion that we believe that the Mayoral Development Corporation is the best and most effective way to proceed with this part of the town centre, and is more likely to bring about the regeneration that we seek. So what we're looking for today is support in principle for that part of the town centre to be designated as a Mayoral Development Corporation, and as the Mayor has said, looking for a formal paper to come back in December for agreement. I think the important thing is that we're not really looking for resources for this part of the town centre. We believe that we can resource that through the models that we have within Stockport Council. What we are looking for is additional power to really transform that part of the town centre. And we do believe that this will also provide the ability to simplify decision making and transform Town Centre West. And importantly, with this model, all planning powers would remain with the local authority. So Stockport will only gain power as a result of this, rather than losing anything in field of planning. But in terms of GM more widely, I think the work that we're asking to be done between now and December can be used for analysing all other town centre challenge areas in Greater Manchester, and will help those areas determine whether this model is right for them, whether it will help them achieve their objectives. So this really is about the whole of GM as much as it is about Stockport Town Centre. And of course, as well as regeneration, it links into our wider aim in Stockport and across GM to limit greenbelt development, because we believe that on this site we can create a new urban village of up to 3,000 new homes, and that is really significant, because if we can build 3,000 new homes there, it means 3,000 homes less on the greenbelt in Greater Manchester. So as well as regeneration, as well as growth, this does also contribute towards our more general objective of development in a sustainable way across GM. So I'm very excited about this. I know colleagues are also excited about it. I want to thank everyone within Stockport and Combined Authority colleagues for all the fantastic work they have done on this to get us to this stage. But I think the real work is yet to come, and there's a real drive and desire to see that through.
Thanks very much indeed, Alex. Any comments from colleagues on this? If not, I would just echo what Alex said about this providing a template for town centre regeneration, or certainly a learning experience. Just check with Eamon. There's no restriction on how many other places could benefit. So the other 8 towns in the Town Centre Challenge could go down a similar route if this is shown to work. I think the attraction for Stockport is that they possibly stand to get all of the benefits, and if there are any problems, I will get all of the hassle. So it seems to work very well from their point of view. But we will see in the way that this moves forward. It's obviously joking aside, a collaboration whether we can work together to continue the brilliant work that's already been done to take Stockport forward. So you will get further detail back in May. I'm sure you will all have noted Alex's point about it not being a demand for extra resources at the GM level, but we will obviously come to consider the detail in a couple of months' time. But with all of those points, if colleagues are content to accept the recommendations and allow Stockport to move forward, we will give them that green light. So thank you very much indeed. And well done, because Stockport is showing a new way, I think, on town centre regeneration in a way that the country has struggled with this issue for quite a long time. And just a reflection on discussions at the Labour Party conference this week, this issue of the potential divide between towns and cities is a growing issue. Certainly Lisa Nandy, the MP for Wigan, has been very vocal in saying about the risk of this divide. And if we look back to Sir Richard's presentation on Brexit, it is clear that there was a voting divide in the referendum, here as well as across the country, between towns and cities. And if we're successful in this, perhaps this is a way of beginning to bridge that divide and show that the success of the economic centre can then also help lift the outlying towns. So there's quite a lot at stake here. I think Sir Richard wanted to come back in.
It's just on that final point you're making, Chair, that I think there is a real risk that having been able to present a unified urban agenda for quite some time, that urban agenda could fracture, and that will be, I think, to the disadvantages of us all. In one of the roles I play as Chair of the City Regions Board, that we're brokering discussions between the members of the City Regions Board, organisations, key cities, core cities, the Centre for Towns, other key think tanks in that area, to try and make sure that we can have a unified, maintain a unified urban agenda. Because I think there's a recent report from Centre for Cities shows that actually our common interest lies in being together, not allowing ourselves to get separated.
It's a really important point, and the Centre for Cities report is excellent, and I'd recommend it to colleagues. For me, the test of devolution here is that it's not just good for the city centre, it's good for all of our outlying towns as well. And that, for me, is what we should be working towards. We want the city centre to thrive, as it is, but we also want to see all of our towns, not just the primary towns of our 10 boroughs, but also secondary and tertiary towns within those boroughs also beginning to recover. So this is a really important proposal. It's an important step that Stockport are taking, but I think they're taking it not just for themselves, but on everyone's behalf to see if we can make this model work. So well done to them, and we will look forward to seeing further proposals in December. Thank you. Item 17, Mayor Paul Dennett.
Thank you, Mayor Burnham. In a sense, I guess what this is a pragmatic response to the fact that Greater Manchester still do not have a housing deal in place. And as colleagues probably remember, we were promised 8 million from government revenue funding to help support us with a place-based team. Also, there was a £50 million land deal. We're still not in a place where government have actually confirmed that for Greater Manchester. However, what Greater Manchester has been successful with is allocations of forward fund and marginal viability, building on the point that Councillor Ganotis made around brownfield first and limiting greenbelt. Certainly some of those allocations are very much about doing that, dealing with infrastructure issues, dealing with land assembly issues, dealing with remediation issues. And what we've got before us today is the fact that the combined authority have been successful with the planning delivery fund. We've been awarded £950,000. And what the proposal in the paper is to do is to support some of the allocations around marginal viability to districts and forward funding allocations to ensure that obviously we speed up the housing delivery on what are predominantly brownfield sites within Greater Manchester. So the combined authority is obviously asked to approve the allocation of the £950,000 as detailed at 2.7 in the report, agree the transfer of funding to the Greater Manchester districts, approve delegation of authority to the GMCA's Chief Exec in consultation with myself and to allocate and identify contingency amounts, and to approve the delegation of authority to the Treasurer to adjust allocations of grants to districts as work proceeds to maximise ultimately the impact of the available funding. I do have to put on record, though, it is deeply disappointing that we did get government to a position where it acknowledged that we needed revenue funding here in Greater Manchester to obviously ensure we've got a place-based team in place within the combined authority, that we can support the districts and we can get on with delivering housing across Greater Manchester. Unfortunately, we are not in that place, and austerity continues to bite in terms of local government cuts. My local authority are faced with another £16 million worth of cuts, taking capacity out of the system to do the exact thing the government wants us to do. So although in a sense this is a pragmatic response with regards to the £950,000 we've been awarded, I think it is a real shame that government haven't given us the necessary revenue funding and taken a good look at themselves around how austerity is disproportionately impacting local government and obviously hampering our ability here in Greater Manchester to actually get on with the job, build the houses people need, and obviously forge ahead with our brownfield sites agenda. I just want to recommend the report to colleagues around the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Given the scale of the financial challenge that local government is facing, this is modest, to say the least, in terms of support, but it is something, and in that regard it is welcome. Paul's explained it pretty clearly. Are colleagues content to accept the recommendations? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Item 18, Greater Manchester Internationalisation Strategy Mid-Term Review. This obviously links very much back to our earlier discussion on Brexit and becomes more and more important as a Greater Manchester strategy in that context. Some encouraging news in this report, and I'll hand over to Sir Richard to deliver it.
I think in terms of what we've achieved since the international strategy was agreed, I think it is a very positive story that we've continued to grow in all the areas that we indicated. There is some, I think, fairly innovative work taking place that changes the way we operate, and given that I said a few negative things about government and its agencies today, I'll say something positive, that there's some really good work being led by Mark Hughes from the Growth Company with DIT about how we get a more joined up approach to foreign direct investment and international trade, not just on a Greater Manchester footprint, but on a whole Northern Powerhouse footprint. Really all the major risks to our strategy have been identified in the discussion around Brexit. I'll take one of the figures from that report to just indicate the scale of the risk. that probably the biggest single employment sector in Greater Manchester now is our visitor economy, certainly within the private sector. For our international visitors, our 1.3 million international visitors, 800,000 come from the European Union, are absolutely crucial to thousands of jobs within the city region. There are some other risks that are not related to Brexit, and some of that's to do with infrastructure investment, and a number of us will have met potential investors from overseas, either those who want to invest capital into our economy or those that are bringing businesses to the economy. One of the interests that is always high on their list is about the state of our current infrastructure and potential investment in that infrastructure. And top of that list always comes High Speed 2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail. Really, really important that we maintain the pressure on the government to make sure that those key spines of a transport system are delivered, as well as getting the investment we need for everything that will feed into those. In terms of what's set out as the work programme for the next year of the three-year strategy, there are no major revisions there. Clearly, if at some point we ever do get some clarity about what is involved around Brexit, bearing in mind that if there is a deal, we then go into a transition period, that will be the time when we will need to look seriously at what revisions are required.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. Any colleague want to comment on this? If not, could I make one point linked to the report around our overseas presence, and particularly our strategy for gaining ground in key markets. Colleagues will know that I visited China last week, spent 5 days there, partly in Beijing, Tianjin, and Shenzhen. I travelled on a train which quite literally bore no relation to any train I've ever seen moving or standing still anywhere in the north of England. The cities in China are powering ahead. What came through to me in my visit was the impact that the Manchester China Forum has had since it was created a few years ago. It has proven to be highly effective in developing high-level relationships between Greater Manchester and the Chinese government, Chinese mayors and other officials at the city level, but also with Chinese universities and others. And I would certainly want to commend the work that they're doing. While we were out there, we took forward discussions around a potential collaboration between Manchester University and Tianjin on graphene. Manchester City Football Club signing or agreeing the terms of their arrangement in Shenzhen and the opening of a new office. We published a report on the Manchester-Beijing direct air link, 2 years in operation now, but delivering substantial economic, trade, social and cultural benefits to both countries. Manchester China Forum has been an incredible success as far as I can see, and I think the principles that underpin it should very much guide the development of the Manchester India Forum, which is referenced in the strategy. So Richard mentions HS2. Of course, that is crucial to our ambitions for Manchester Airport. If we get what we've been promised at the airport with regard to HS2 and the north-south links, but also Northern Powerhouse Rail and the west-east links, that, in my view, would make Manchester one of, if not the best connected airport in Europe. There are rumours about HS2 and its completion north of Birmingham. I think the message from this combined authority has to go back that is absolutely essential investment if we are to get anywhere close to the Northern Powerhouse that the government has promised us. With those observations, can I thank Sir Richard for his report. This is exactly the work that Greater Manchester needs to be doing at this particular moment in time, and as we can see in the report, it's proving to be highly effective. There's even more we can do to build the Manchester brand on the world stage, as the report recognises, but we will give those recommendations serious consideration. So, thank you very much, Sir Richard. That's agreed, and we move on to item 19, which is the North West Made Smarter pilot. Sir Richard. Again, so this will fall to Jim to do. Jim Taylor. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Chair. So the report references that as part of the National Industrial Strategy, Jürgen Meyer, who's the CEO of Siemens UK and also a key member of the Greater Manchester LEP, he led the Made Smarter review, which was published in 2017, and that's focused on driving productivity through the adoption of what's called Industrial Digital Technology, IDT, and that's in the UK manufacturing sector. A key recommendation of the review was the development and funding of a large-scale pilot in order to develop a delivery model that can be rolled out nationally. In response, government agreed to make 20 million available for the Made Smarter national adoption pilot, and that was to be delivered in the northwest of England. And the target of the pilot is to increase regional GVA by up to 115 million, and that's over 30 months, and the pilot will test some of the most effective ways to engage manufacturers in the northwest, and it will encourage them to adopt industrial digital technology, and that's to improve competitiveness, increase exports, and also to raise regional productivity. And we know the northwest is one of the UK's largest regional economies. It has the greatest manufacturing output, produces 9% of the UK's total exports, so it's very, very valid that this pilot takes place here in the northwest. The 20 million investment is matched by industry. That will enable regional piloting of the adoption proposals recommended in the review. It will enable engagement with 3,000 SMEs across the northwest, which is considerable. I'm delighted to say that the Growth Company have been selected to deliver this particular programme for the northwest. BEIS have confirmed the funding will be via a Section 31 grant, which is payable to a local authority. And the report proposes that the GMCA acts as that local authority. It ring-fences the grants and as such becomes the accountable body for the Made Smarter Northwest pilot. And BEIS will retain regular monitoring to assess progress of the payments. There will be a back-to-back agreement with the Growth Company to ensure that GMCA doesn't face any potential liabilities. So the recommendations are at the front of the report. Firstly, that the CA support the Made Smarter National Adoption Pilot, and also to agree as the accountable body for the 20 million fund. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Jim. I think we all would want to congratulate Jürgen Meyer for the excellent report and work that he did for the government, but that has also paved the way for this substantial investment in manufacturing across the northwest and particularly in Greater Manchester. So it is excellent news. It also will link to our carbon reduction objectives, and so very much plays into our Green City agenda, because obviously use of digital technology in manufacturing can optimise processes and lead to a significant carbon reduction. So this is really important. It plays into the local industrial strategy that we're seeking to agree with the government next year, and it is excellent progress. Any colleagues want to comment on this item? If not, Jim, thank you very much for the work that's been done, and we look forward to seeing further reports as the pilot progresses. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 19. Have I got that right? No, 20. Northern. Sorry to lower the tone of the meeting. Northern and Transpennine Express Rail Performance Update. Well, colleagues have got the paper, and the figures are there for people to read. What we can see here, firstly on Northern, is that performance appears to have stabilised, which you could say is a good thing to a degree, but it's settled at a level that is way below what it was at this time last year, and it wasn't great at this time last year. So, you know, this is not acceptable progress from my point of view. As we saw in the report that was issued last week from the Office of the Rail Regulator, yes, Network Rail did bear significant responsibility for the chaos that befell us in May this year, but they were not the solely responsible. And it is clear that what we had said all along was true, that this was a shared responsibility of both Network Rail and the train operating companies as well, having failed to prepare and have sufficient resilience in their systems to manage the problems that came. If we look at the short forming of trains by Northern, you will see the graph there continues to be considerable volatility, and I feel that is a problem that affects a lot of commuters in Greater Manchester, just not knowing whether they will be able to get on the train when it arrives at the various platforms across the city region. If you look at the graph, it shows that it's all over the place, and again, that isn't a rail service that people can plan their lives around or depend upon. Not acceptable. Cancellations continue around weekends, again, not acceptable. Looking at TransPennine, I think a more worrying picture, actually. It's a picture of deterioration since the May timetable, and it hasn't properly recovered. It did slightly to 71% punctuality, and it currently stands at 79%, but that is down from 90% this time last year. So both of our main rail operators have kind of come back to a level that is way below what they were offering last year, and as we would all know, that wasn't good enough either. So this is the situation that we are in. At the mayoral question time here last night, commuters who use Greenfield Station, which is obviously a crucial station for people living in the east of this borough, they have seen a major deterioration in their service levels, both in terms of the construct of the new timetable, but they're now even seeing the prospect of potential further reductions in service, which just isn't at all acceptable. What I would want to say to colleagues, just a couple of points in closing, is firstly, through TFN, I have been using my voice repeatedly to say that this isn't good enough, and with other Northern leaders, we propose that a troubleshooter be brought in to oversee both Network Rail and the train operating companies to try and bring some order to this failing picture. That was agreed by the government at the meeting earlier this month. So Richard George has been appointed as that troubleshooter, and we hope that the application of one controlling mind to this fragmented and chaotic situation will actually bring some clarity, and we'll begin to see those levels improve. We're told that they will improve when the Bolton electrification opens finally in December. I gather that is still on track, but that obviously has to be taken with a pinch of salt, as does everything that you hear from the rail industry. But with that, I'm said that we can expect to see a significant improvement in rail services by December, getting back to what we were promised in the new franchise by May next year. What I'm seeking your support on, colleagues, is to hold the train operators to that. A major improvement by December, and then up to what we were promised by May next year. And we lay that out as our clear conditions, because if they are not met, then I believe it should be the position of this combined authority to apply for the removal of the franchise from the train operators. They cannot be allowed to inflict their miserable services on us on an ongoing basis. Action needs to be taken, clear action, and that will be the position that I would seek to represent on your behalf at the Transport for the North Partnership meeting. Councillor Linda Thomas.
Yeah, I endorse everything you say there. I mean, I think Bolton, everywhere was hit, but Bolton was particularly badly hit because we have no access to a tram. So if you want Bolton people to get out of the cars and reduce carbon emission, I'm afraid there has been very little alternative. December the 1st, I think I agree with you. We'll treat that with a pinch of salt. We'll be in the height of the winter when people will have to face even more misery if this doesn't happen. And I think Bolton people are just fed up of hearing about it. I just don't think they believe them. So I think I need to lodge that here now, because obviously when we go back to Bolton, people will be wanting to make sure that we have made those comments in public. Let's just wait and see. But I think really the threat of taking the franchise back, we should make that now. Actually, that we think that should happen now. Chris Grayling's absolutely doesn't want to have any accountability for it. So I think we have to make a stand on behalf of the public of Greater Manchester.
You've no doubt spoken for the long-suffering travelling public of Bolton, Linda, very clearly. Councillor Ganotis.
Thank you. This report focuses on performance and punctuality issues, and rightly so, given the issues that we're currently facing. But I just want to draw attention to two further issues that it's important we don't lose sight of. The first thing is that Northern Rail continue to have contractual issues with its staff, which means that currently improved Sunday services that they had promised are unlikely to be delivered during the course of this franchise. And I think it's really important that we are clear that the Department for Transport has to give this issue priority. They need to resolve this with Northern Rail so that those contractual issues can be resolved and that we can see improved Sunday services. So the issue with Sunday services is slightly different. It's due to the contractual issues they're having with their staff. We have talked about this previously at the Combined Authority, and it's important that we continue to put that pressure on the Department for Transport. Secondly, as far as I'm concerned, there has been no movement on this wider issue about the extent to which regional and national services are given priority in timetabling decisions over local services. And we know the importance of local services to our residents. And again, this is something that we need to keep the pressure on both Network Rail and the Department for Transport. We cannot underplay the role of local services to our local economy and the lives of our residents. And I'm afraid we just haven't seen any movement on either of those issues over the summer, and that obviously has to be part of our mix. And just in terms of the previous comment about Chris Grayling, he is the Transport Secretary. He has to take charge of these issues. And if he doesn't, to the extent he does not consider this to be relevant to his role, you do need to ask yourself, what is the point of him? What is the point of having a transport secretary? So I think we need to keep pressure on all of these fronts to make sure that we do get services that we deserve.
Big questions, and I'm not sure I've got an answer to them directly there, Alex. So, but thank you very much, and I'll come back to your issue on the franchise obligations around Sunday services at the end. Councillor David Molyneux.
Yeah, just to echo Linda's point, because we like Bolton, we've not got the tram connections into Manchester, which are needed for people to go to university, to go to employment, to get to the airport, and the service has been absolutely abysmal. It's terrible. The only thing that would bother me if Chris Grayling in a cabinet shuffle suddenly got the Brexit negotiations, that would really put the top hat on it. But can I just say, my patience has worn very thin over this issue. Certainly the people I represent are sick to the back teeth with it. And I think you've been very generous putting off asking for the franchise to be taken away till after Christmas. I certainly think I'd like to see it taken away now. I think it's been shambolic. The excuses have been weak. And like other leaders, I've probably received a number of emails telling which trains have been cancelled for the weekend services and the considerable amount of trains at that. And I just think it's been a shambles. And honestly, I think the franchise should be taken away now. But I'm quite happy for you to put forward what you're saying to the Northern Rail people as soon as possible.
Thanks, Dave. Any other colleagues want to come in on this? Just then to pick up those 2 points. Alex, on your point on Sunday services, this is the risk of the situation that we're in, that we're so focused just on getting current performance back to where it should be, that franchise obligations around enhancing Sunday services seem to have been, they've been sort of relieved of those expectations. Well, no, actually, they are very clear, and as you say, they are crucial to many communities in different parts of Greater Manchester. So I will make sure that that they are very much on the table when these matters are being discussed at Transport for the North. David, on your point, I think the report did say last week that there was a shared responsibility here, and yes, Network Rail do bear a considerable degree of the blame, and that's why I think we do have to get the Bolton electrification open and then see what happens to services once that has opened, because it was a big cause of the chaos, so hence the allowing of further time. But as far as I'm concerned, once that is open, and once a new May timetable has come in where we are told that there'll be further refinements and changes to kind of deal with issues, that is the point at which, unless they are up to franchise obligations, then we say, as a GMCA, that they should remove, we should call for the removal. I think you might say it is actually quite a patient position, given I know you are speaking for your constituents who would say do it now. Given the turbulence that we've got, I think to add that in might not bring good rail services back quicker than the course that I'm advocating. But it is very clear they are on notice. And if this doesn't change in the 6 months ahead of us, then our position will be abundantly clear. And I can assure you I will prosecute it with great vigour at the TFN level and indeed with the government. Okay, thank you very much indeed, colleagues. Moving on to item 21, Mayor's Cycling and Walking Challenge Fund. I don't think we need to detain colleagues greatly on this item, other than to say good progress continues to be made with the B-Lines concept. Here we have a further 6 schemes coming forward, all of which are requesting funding under £5 million. Salford seems to be getting out of the traps pretty well when it comes to B-Lines, 3 in Salford, 1 for Stockport, 1 Trafford, 1 Wigan. The concept of B-Lines continues to get big interest from other parts of the country. Chris Boardman and his team continue to do an excellent job. I take it today that colleagues will want this just to move forward so we continue to make the progress that we need. Of course, it does play into our plan around air quality, and we need to crack on with all of that. So I'm hoping, colleagues, that you will agree the recommendations set out at the front of the report. Thank you very much. Moving on, item 21, Greater Manchester Local Growth Deal. This is a summary of major schemes, an overview of where we're up to on schemes, many of which you will be familiar with because they are underway within your boroughs as we speak. I will just draw colleagues' attention to the progress being made on Growth Deal 3 transport schemes, many of which relate to passenger information enhancements for bus passengers and rail passengers, but also the development of the Scoot network, as it's called, which enables more intelligent control of junctions and traffic lights at junctions, and hence may enable us to improve our management of congestion across Greater Manchester, which remains a major concern for many people. Congestion, of course, linked to some of the major schemes we have underway. Difficult but crucial schemes to build out the capacity of some of our junctions. So this is more by way of an update. Unless colleagues want a longer discussion about it, I suggest we just note the update. But thank particularly TFGM and colleagues for the work that's ongoing across Greater Manchester. Thank you, colleagues. Item 23 Greater Manchester non-executive director's appointment, we suggest to defer this item, obviously with John's departure and the change that brings, to consider issues related to the leadership of TFGM in the round at a future meeting. So I propose that item be withdrawn. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 24, Local Enterprise Partnership Review. Sir Richard.
I'll be brief on this, Chair. I think whilst there are some minor items that arise for Greater Manchester out of the Local Enterprise Partnership Review, pretty much most of what we do already complies with the recommendations that are coming out of the review. That's not the case everywhere. I think that pays testimony to the partnership work that's been done not only between the local authorities over a long period of time, but also with colleagues within the business sector, because of the arrangements that we put in place when the LEP was first established. But it's also our presence in developing a mayoral combined authority, which also minimises the changes that we have to make.
Thanks very much indeed, Richard. I think this doesn't apply hugely to us for the reasons Sir Richard just has given. Our LEP already is operating in a way that the government is hoping others will work. There are some smaller refinements that we will make, but if colleagues are content, we will accept the recommendations. Thank you very much. Item 25 has been deferred because further work is needed to the proposal, and it will be brought back to the CA at appropriate time. Item 26, Housing Investment Loans Fund. Mayor Dennett.
Yeah, happy to take any questions in Part B, or I can just cover all of this in Part A if colleagues have questions. No questions? Okay, so we've had one application this month through the Housing Investment Fund, and that's from Tameside on Vernon Street, from Olive Property Construction Northern Limited Developer, and that's for £1.366 million. So 24 apartments, it's an SME developer, and it's also a stalled site in Tameside, which we've been struggling to get away. If we agree this recommendation today, it will take the investment loans fund from 432.4 million to 433.7 million, and that does include £2 million worth of equity. Colleagues will also note in the report that there is an update on approvals obviously taken in August. Obviously we didn't have a combined authority in August, and there were some that came forward. One was from Paul Cook Developments, Whitehaven Limited. It's an SME developer. That was for an award of £792,000. 10 apartments, all of those will be at affordable rents, which is really good news. The other was for £2 million worth of equity to move into the registered providers joint venture from the Housing Investment Fund. So just draw your attention to the recommendations at the start of the report, which is to approve the GM Housing Investments Loans Fund in the table below as detailed further in this and the accompanying Part B report, and to delegate authority to the Treasurer acting in conjunction with the Monitoring Officer to prepare and effect the necessary legal agreements. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. Any comments on this? If not, we'll take it that's agreed. Thank you very much. So that concludes our business for today. I'd just like to point out to colleagues that Lynn Collins from the North West TUC, Trades Union Congress, has joined our meeting today. Of course, TUC in their 150th anniversary year, founded in the heart of our city centre, and recently hosted a successful Trades Union Congress. We are proposing today to sign the Dying to Work campaign, which is the TUC's national campaign around giving employees with a terminal illness much greater protection in the workplace. So if colleagues agree and wouldn't mind staying around, we'd look forward to showing Greater Manchester solidarity with the campaign, and we very much welcome Lynn who's joining us today. And I'll just conclude by thanking Oldham for hosting us. It's the first time we've been for a while, but nice to be in these impressive surroundings. Thank you also to staff at the library who hosted the mayoral question time last night. They did a brilliant job. It was good to meet the Oldham Theatre Workshop in their 50th anniversary year, funded by the council, wearing their badge today. So it's been a great couple of days, and look forward to taking forward the Royton Town Centre proposals later on this afternoon. So with that, thank you very much indeed, colleagues, for your attendance. A very substantial agenda that we've had today, but we've got through it, but real progress on a number of fronts, particularly on rough sleeping and homelessness. A big week with Vincent Company pledging his support to our efforts. We do send him our sincerest thanks, and from today, I think we move forward with a plan that is going to improve and help a lot of people and change a lot of lives in the coming months, and particularly over the winter. So with that, thank you, colleagues, and we will resume next month. Thank you.